Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right, hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I'm your host, Bill Rader, and joining me is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, how you doing?
Billy Raids, how you doing, buddy?
Doing okay. This is a sort of like an emergency episode.
It is. It is. I wanted to get this out. I know you were down Monday Night Football. You couldn't be on with Jim DiEugenio, but I wanted to get him on. It was very important. I think to get ahead of this book that's coming out from Chris Wallace. Chris Wallace of CNN, formerly Fox. It's another attempt to, destroy the reputation of John Kennedy and tear down all the good things he did and try to pump up Richard Nixon. And, we got Jim on to tell the truth, as we always do.
Yeah.
Well, before we even get to that, because I want to talk about that a little more before we get to the interview itself, but I just want to tell people, got a lot of things going on our Patreon page. Really a lot of good, we have the speakeasy episodes every week, that's different from the free site. It's a different side of me and Bill. We talk a lot more sports. You see more of our personality, I think, more of our opinions. Definitely we get into politics more. And we got guests coming on there. Cybersecurity Month. We've had 2 guests for talking, cybersecurity experts on. And we have Patreon members that come on that they pay the tier to come on with us. And they even write articles for our website. So we got good things going on there. Patreon, Bill, you could join for as little as $1 a month. You can't beat that, buddy.
Right.
I mean, like you said before, Bill, you lose that in your car looking for change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we got that going on. We got the merchandise store. We got a lot of good stuff on there. We got a lot of stuff on our website you can check out. We also have the bookshop, Billy. I think it's important. We have all these authors on, and we get their books, like 95% of them we were able to put on our bookshop. And I think it's important to get away from using Bezos and Amazon and use bookshop, because the money goes to help local bookstores. You can see the amount of money that they've raised for local bookstores is incredible. And I want to keep them around, Billy. I want to keep local bookstores around. So it helps them. Part goes to the author, the publisher, and then, of course, a little piece goes to us to keep us going. So I think it's important, Billy.
Yeah, definitely. You think about these mom and pop, bookshops that had been around for many, many years. And, then we had like Walden Books and Books A Million and all these big bookstores that opened up that kind of, we're putting them out of business. And now Amazon's putting those bookstores out of business. So
sure, and that's that's what they're trying to do. They'll lower their rates, and then as soon as they got all these bookstores out of business, they'll increase their rates. I mean, Come on.
Exactly. So
that's what guys like Bezos do.
This helps, it helps to keep those mom and pop shops open, and because the money goes to them. And it's a good, it's great to be able to support the bookshops and the authors, and I think it's a fantastic service. So definitely do that. And Sean, you mentioned our Patreon. I mean, that's really, there's so much content on that Patreon.
There is.
You gotta just, check it out. I mean, you could even look at it for free if you wanted to, but you're not gonna get all the content.
We've been putting a couple episodes from Speakeasy on the free site just to give people a little taste of what's going on.
Right.
and what they're getting, what they're missing really.
Yeah.
That's important. And the other thing I want to mention, Billy, is, we're looking to add a couple more sponsors because now it's the time of year where some of these seasonal businesses, they're not going to need advertising for, till the spring. So we got some openings now. And anybody with a small business, even if it's not local, I mean, we got a strong local base, but we also, we're national, international. We're working on a couple international sponsors. So, anybody that has a business, knows somebody, reach out to us. We'll give them the details on that, and we have a pretty good reach, Billy. So we help our sponsors, and they help us.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've gotten great response, from our sponsors telling us about the increase in business that they've seen just from, from the ads on our show. So that's really, really cool. And then, the other thing, Sean, obviously with YouTube, give us a subscribe and a like and a, comment on these videos. We've been seeing a real uptick in comments lately. Some great comments I've been seeing come through. So
unbelievable.
I'm sure we're gonna do another question and comment show coming up next month. So you get your comments in there, and please hit that subscribe, because we're so close. We're so close to to that magic number of 500. We really need you guys, need your support. So yeah, I mean, that's it, Sean. And I know this interview went really well with Jim. So we'll.
And Billy, it was really important, I think, because at this point, if you listen to our podcast from the beginning, we had Jim on many times. We had Lisa Pease on. We had Don McGovern, and all their episodes that they were on, they talk about this, character assassination against the Kennedys, and this stuff with Marilyn Monroe and the mafia and all this stuff. And there's people that still believe it, Bill, in the research community, because something is just said over and over and over, and it's really hard to get rid of that stigma. And this is what we're trying to do. And Jim does a great job as always. But he talks about a lot of great things in this interview. And it was an amazing interview, Billy. Amazing. And I hope people enjoy it. And too bad you weren't there, Billy, but you were there in spirit watching the Giants lose. But I mean,
well, I'll tell you what, I had a blast in Pittsburgh. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, a lot of great. I mean, Pittsburgh's a great city, Sean.
Great city. I've been there. I see Notre Dame play Pitt down there. It's great. I loved it down there.
Such a great city. I can't wait to go back. I used to go every once in a while for work, and now I go for fun. And yeah, it's really cool. So all right, Sean, I'll tell you what, why don't we fit one of our sponsors in, and then we'll get to the interview with you and Jim.
Sounds good, Billy. Enjoy, everybody.
All right, thank you.
DK's Corner has moved. Come see us in our brand new location at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, right across from the Jessup Plaza. Enjoy a brand new menu with hot and cold sandwiches, soups, salads, pizza, delicious breakfast, including breakfast bowls and sandwiches, specialty coffees, and DK's famous Razzle Dazzle flavor shaken espressos, and still the best cheesesteaks around. Follow DK's Corner on Facebook and Instagram, or call them at 570-209-0278 to find out about their daily specials and catering. And DK's Corner now has beautiful outdoor seating for the summer. Don't feel like leaving the house? Call DK's Corner for delivery. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. DK's Corner, now in Jessup, Pennsylvania.
Jim, how you doing, buddy?
Fine. Nice to be here.
Thanks, Jim. So I wanted to get you on here, Jim, because I think it's really important to get this episode out. We're going to try to get this out this week, even though we have like 3-4 episodes pre-recorded. We're going to bump this up because your article on Kennedys and King is terrific regarding the Chris Wallace, of course, from Fox and CNN. His book on the 1960 election, Countdown 1960, where, of course, he tries to pump up Richard Nixon and kind of knock down John Kennedy. So I feel it's important to get in front of this thing and get out here. So let's start talking about it, Jim.
All right. This book, which, as you mentioned, is called Countdown 1960, purports to show the real race between Kennedy and Nixon in the presidential campaign of 1960. It does nothing of the sort. Okay. First of all, right at the beginning, Wallace's intent on aggrandizing Nixon and shrinking Kennedy. All right. Nixon ran two of the worst, dirtiest, most unscrupulous campaigns in post-World War II American political history to first get into Congress and then get into the Senate. Okay. One against Jerry Voorhees.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that was in 46. And then once against Helen Hayden Douglas, which was even worse, and that was in 1950.
Right.
Wallace devotes one paragraph to that 1950 race, which is just unbelievable. Okay? It's really kind of shocking. Greg Mitchell, as I wrote in my article, wrote a whole book on this.
Right.
Okay? Called Tricky Dick and the Pink Lady. All right? And in his references, Wallace does not allude to that book. I couldn't find anything. But that really exposes. They actually called her a courier for Stalin. Okay?
Wow.
And they they made phone calls up and down the state saying, "Did you know she was married to a Jew?" Okay? And then they created this body, okay, this fake shell company called Negro Women for Voters for Douglas, and emblazoned on the card was, "We're voting for Helen. I hope you do too." Obviously meant, as a racist kind of thing,
Sure. Sure.
and and to cover up all this, okay, to paper it over, to completely kind of erase it from the record, is, I believe, to be utterly false about who Richard Nixon was. Okay,
Sure.
Richard Nixon was a hatchet man. Okay, and he employed other hatchet men like Murray Schottner and Pat Buchanan in his campaigns down through the years. All right, and Wallace just whitewashes it. Now, as far as Kennedy goes, he uses this whole cliche, okay, that I've seen so many times and is just utterly, false to what the facts were. He uses this whole handsome, well-groomed, Seville Row suits, playboy type of image to Kennedy. Now, now, he says Kennedy started his campaign in 1957, which I do not agree with. But if you're going to use that,
Put the speech in.
how on earth can any honest writer ignore the Algeria speech?
Right.
Okay, if you're going to start from that year,
Sure.
he does. He ignores it completely. Now, very briefly, it was that speech that put Kennedy on the map,
Right.
because it got both parties, both the Republicans and the Democrats, up in arms. That's how radical what he was saying in that speech.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
also, it was that speech that eventually got him on the cover of Time magazine. All right, and the story inside was called "Man Out Front."
Right.
Now, when Kennedy, very briefly, the message of that speech was that the United States should not be backing French colonialism in Northern Africa, specifically Algeria. Okay, and he mentioned at the end that what we should be doing is escorting France to the negotiating table. All right, to avoid another disaster like 3 years ago at Dien Bien Phu. All right. Okay. And to avoid a civil war. The second thing we should be doing is freeing Africa. All right. That message for 1957 was quite radical. I
Sure.
mean, nobody was saying that, especially on the floor of the Senate. All right.
Sure.
And that vaulted him. And in fact, Alistair Cook, the British political writer, said, you know, whether consciously or unconsciously, Kennedy has now made himself, okay, the object of Republican ire. Okay. And this is going to benefit him because he's now the man to beat.
Right.
Okay. All right. And even John Shaw, in his rather conservative book, Kennedy in the Senate, said it was that speech that made Kennedy the new foreign relations impresario of the
Mhm.
Democratic Party.
Right.
Now, I don't think there's any better example to show what Wallace is up to by erasing the Helen Douglas race from his book and
Yeah.
not including the Algeria speech in his book. I mean, those are
Sure.
two dead giveaways. So right off the bat, like by about page 25, this book is, MSMBS, okay, which I think we've all had more than enough of. All
Right.
right.
So also another thing in his book, Jim, is how Wallace tries to talk about how, Nixon was so good on civil rights. And yeah, it's laughable. It's laughable. And to downplay Kennedy, where Kennedy wasn't
This
interested in
is
civil rights.
this
And
is really this is really unbelievable. Okay. I mean, really, I mean, this is like out of science fiction. All right. The idea that Richard Nixon and Dwight Eisenhower were actually champions of the civil rights movement
Right.
is just so ludicrous. I don't know how he kept a straight face when he was writing this. All right. Okay. Just let me point out a few things. All right. Number one, Eisenhower tried to talk Earl Warren out of voting for the Brown versus Board decision.
Yep. Yep.
Now, in and of itself, that tells you just about everything you want to know about Nixon, Eisenhower, and civil rights.
Sure.
Because the Brown versus Board decision was an epical moment in the whole civil rights movement. All right.
Yeah.
To advise Warren to vote against it, I mean, that is, now on top of that, Nixon and Eisenhower did not support the Brown versus Board movement. All right.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
In fact, the whole 8 years they were in office, there were 10 civil rights suits filed. Okay. About one a year. Actually, it was one a year because on the very last day of the Eisenhower administration, they popped two in there. I think they
Right.
did that to make it double digits. Okay. They didn't want to go, one per year. Okay.
Sure.
Now to say that is making progress on civil rights is rather ridiculous because Bobby Kennedy, when he became Attorney General, he tripled that number in
Right.
his first year. In
Yes,
his
sir.
first
Yeah.
year, okay? All right. All right. Now, he also, like many other people, he also brings in the Little Rock, Arkansas Central High crisis.
Right.
Okay. And how Eisenhower eventually had to bring in federal troops, okay, to protect the students. What he doesn't say is what all these other Republican types don't say. That crisis went on for 20 days
20 days. Yeah.
before Eisenhower was forced to act.
Yep.
Okay. All right. He let those kids be terrorized by the National Guard
He
and by
did.
the governor, Orville Faubus, for 3 weeks. All right. Then he went on vacation to Newport, Rhode Island during the middle of this crisis. All right. And he called the governor, Orville Faubus, to meet with him. Faubus double crossed him. All right. Said he was going to go ahead and withdraw the guard. Okay. But he didn't. All right. Okay. And then there had to be a court action in order to make him do that. But when he ordered the guard to leave, not to protect the students. So he tricked Eisenhower twice. All right. And then this forced, because now the white racist crowd had direct access to these kids. All right. And so now Eisenhower had no choice because now the media, even the media was getting on him. All right. So he had to call in Army troops to protect the students there.
Right.
He then tried to paper this over, and Wallace falls for it. Okay. He tried to paper this over by submitting a Civil Rights Commission Act to the Senate. All right. Let me make this very clear. Eisenhower and Nixon had no interest in civil rights. What
No.
they were trying to do with this was to split the Democratic Party, the North from the South,
South.
okay,
Yep.
from the Northern
Sure.
liberals to the Southern conservatives.
Yep.
And so Johnson, the Senate Majority Leader, understood this. So he tried to soften the polarizing aspects of that bill, all right,
Right.
which made it even weaker than it was at the beginning, all right. Now, Wallace says that Kennedy voted for the bill, which is true. But what he doesn't say is that Kennedy didn't want to vote for the bill. He didn't want to. He actually wrote a constituent saying that he thought it was too weak, and
Right.
he hoped one day he could actually vote for one with real teeth. All right. Johnson sent 2 emissaries up to his office to try and talk him into voting for the bill. He didn't want to do it. Johnson had to go there himself, okay, and lobby him in person to get him to vote for the bill. Finally, Kennedy called these 2 Ivy League lawyers up in Boston, okay, and he asked them, "What should I do here?"
Right.
And they said words of the effect, "Look, it's better than nothing." Okay. You know, and so that's how he ended up voting. That's how he ended up voting for the bill. All right.
Right.
But as Harris Wofford, who was the lawyer for this Civil Rights Commission that was set up, as he wrote in his book of Kennedys and King, he said, look, every recommendation we made was ignored by the White House. So it was really kind of a diversion from the real issue. Okay, so this idea that Chris Wallace tries to, to put forth that somehow Eisenhower and Nixon championed civil rights, I mean, this is utter baloney. Okay,
Yeah, it's pathetic.
Now when Kennedy gets in there, of course everything changes.
Sure.
You know, like Judge Frank Johnson, the great jurist from the South, said when Kennedy got in there, it was like lightning on civil rights. All right.
Right.
And so the whole, as I've proven before in my article, the MSN on Kennedy and civil rights, Kennedy did more for civil rights in 3 years than Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower did in 3 decades. How
Sure.
on earth Wallace can even begin to distort that record is utterly amazing.
And Jim, you pointed out before that Kennedy started on day one when he noticed
Yes.
there's no black faces in the Coast Guard parade.
Right. But
You wanna
on the
know
day
why?
it was inaugurated, and remember, this is supposed to be the triumph of his life.
Sure.
Okay, he's being sworn in as president.
Right.
That night, he calls up his Secretary of Treasury, Douglas Dillon. Okay, and he says, "Why were there no black faces in that Coast Guard parade today?" And Dillon says, "I don't know." And Kennedy says, "Well, find out." Okay. And they found out that the Coast Guard had not admitted an African American student, I think, in 4 or 5 years. And Kennedy was very shocked by this, and he suspected something was afoot. And at the first cabinet meeting, he says, "I want everybody in this room to bring a chart of all the people of color in your department and where they're at in the hierarchy to the next meeting." And so that's what they did. And
Right.
so Kennedy was shocked when he saw this because they were so few, okay, and they were all clustered toward the bottom of the hierarchy, you know, like clerical and custodial stuff. And
Sure.
that's what provoked him to sign the first affirmative action order, okay, in American history. which I believe was in March of 1961. So about 45 days after he's inaugurated, he's getting right on this thing. All right. And by the way, he brought in Harris Wofford to be his civil rights advisor. The guy who said that Nixon and Eisenhower didn't do anything, he brought him
Right.
in to be his civil rights advisor. And and
And-
and to wrap this up, Wofford wrote a 35-page plan, 35-page plan to finally pass a civil rights bill, which he advised Kennedy, you will not be able to do your first year, and you probably won't be able to do your second year. Okay, but if you go through the executive branch and the Justice Department, you might build enough ballast in order to pass it in your third year. And that's what Kennedy did. All right.
Sure. And Jim, could you tell the story of what the Kennedys did in Prince Edward County, Virginia?
Oh my God. Oh,
I think
that's
important.
that's an
That's
amazing
unbelievable.
story.
Sure.
Okay. In Virginia, there was a tremendous backlash against the Brown versus Board decision. All right. To the point that they didn't even want to finance public schools in black areas. Okay. And literally, Prince Edward County did not have a school system. And they wrote a letter to Eisenhower about this. And Eisenhower said something like, well, I can't supersede what a state wants to do. Dwight, isn't that what we fought the Civil War for? Okay. So, all right. And so they waited for Kennedy to get into office. And so they wrote Kennedy. And Kennedy says, we will do something about this. All right. And so what they did was one of the most amazing things. They literally created a whole new school district. They got Nicholas von Hoffman, a friend of was it no. That's not
Vanderhoovel, wasn't it
yeah,
Vanderhoovel?
that's it, Vanderhoovel. Okay. They got him to go around and collect contributions from wealthy institutions or people. Okay. He collected all this money. He set up an office. Okay. And he literally built a school district from the
Incredible.
ground up. Okay. He rented buildings. He hired a superintendent. They hired principals. Okay. They put out ads that you could register. Okay. On such and I'll tell you the pictures of the registration day, which you can see online, are really remarkable. Okay.
Yeah.
They've got kids like all, bunched up outside the doors because they haven't been to school in 2 or 3 years. Okay.
Sure.
And so they finally opening up this new school district. And so if you ever want to see the difference between Kennedy and Nixon on civil rights, that's a great example right there.
Sure. Absolutely. And another thing the book does, Jim, is they try to make Nixon, well, Wallace tries to make Nixon this great foreign policy expert. And I never understood that. They do the same thing with Henry Kissinger, and I just never understood
This
it.
is, the whole idea that somehow Nixon and Kissinger were foreign policy mavens, foreign policy impresarios, is just so ridiculous. I mean, look, now that we have a lot of declassified documents,
Right.
because Nixon didn't want to let anything loose. Okay. He literally fought the National Archives
Sure.
for years. Okay.
Yeah.
And he hired a whole fleet of lawyers. Okay. To obstruct the declass. And now we know why. Okay. Because Nixon was pure and simple, a classic Cold Warrior. Okay.
Sure.
All the way down the line. And his model and hero was John Foster Dulles. Okay. And that is what he modeled himself on, and that is what he did. He simply had, let's put it this way, Nixon and Kissinger are responsible for not one, not 2, but 3 genocides.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There's the one in East Timor,
Yeah.
okay, in Indonesia. There's the one in Bangladesh,
Hmm.
okay, but those were kind of small compared to the big one in Cambodia,
Yeah.
okay. All right,
Sure.
because in Cambodia you're talking about 2 million, about 2 million people, okay, in that one. All
Yeah.
right. So here's my question. How on earth can you be in foreign policy maven when you're directly responsible for killing about 2.3 million people at a minimum? Okay, which was completely avoidable because
Sure.
this whole idea that Nixon had that by invading Laos and Cambodia, he could win the Vietnam War. To put it mildly, it didn't work out very well. Okay. But let me add very quickly something even worse. Do you know what Operation Duck Hook was?
Yeah.
This was Nixon's plan to get a Korea style settlement in Vietnam.
Right.
And he warned uh, Hanoi about this through Kissinger.
Hmm.
The original plan for Duck Hook, okay, was bombing the dikes. And John Newman told me that if you would bomb those dikes, you would have killed 500,000 people.
Wow.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. The use of atomic weapons at the pass between China and Vietnam, the blockading of the port of Sihanoukville, the mining of Haiphong Harbor, saturation bombing in the north, and American combat troops invading the north. Okay. Now, the reason that Johnson never did that is because McNamara was very afraid that the Chinese would intervene if you used American combat troops to invade the North. All right. Okay. But this is how, even Stephen Ambrose, a rather sympathetic biographer of Nixon, said
Hmm.
that Nixon was a little bit touched about the whole subject of Vietnam. Okay, he was a little bit over the edge. I'd say he was a lot over the edge.
Lot over the
Okay,
edge.
okay, but
Yeah.
I mean, here you have Kennedy, who would not even issue combat troops to Vietnam.
No.
And here you have Nixon dropping atomic bombs, bombing the dikes, etc. Okay, so this whole idea that somehow Nixon was okay. One last point on this. If you remember, there was a time in the 80s where you had Gorbomania in the United
Sure.
States.
Yeah.
Okay. People really believed that Gorbachev was the real deal.
Hmm.
Even Margaret Thatcher said it. He's a guy we can deal with.
Hmm.
Reagan liked Gorbachev. They almost made a tremendous arrangement at Iceland, okay, to knock off half the atomic weapons in the world. They almost did that. Richard Pearl busted it up. Okay. But he called Nixon and Kissinger in to the White House. And he wanted to know, well, what do you think of this Gorbachev guy? And this is how stupid Nixon was. He told him he's just another apparatchik. Okay. All right. Don't be suckered by him. And
Wow.
then as he was leaving, he told his advisors, don't leave Reagan in the room one-on-one with Gorbachev. Okay.
Wow.
See, this is the kind of cold warrior that Nixon was. So for
Sure.
Wallace to, it's just ridiculous. All right. That's how bad this book is.
And you compare that with all that Kennedy did, and you talked many
Oh
times
yeah. I mean,
about
can you compare him with Kennedy?
anti-colonialism.
Yeah, it's night and day.
Sure.
All over the world in all these spots where you can compare, the two. You've got Vietnam, which is a great example. You've got the Middle
Indonesia.
East, another example. You
Right.
have,
Indonesia.
Central So you can go on and show the thing. Africa, that's another one. All right. So, Eisenhower tried to kill Lumumba.
Sure, he did.
Okay. Kennedy was trying to use Lumumba as a way to free the rest of Africa as a democratic example, you know.
Yeah.
And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So, this is great, Billy. What he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy. Tom's philosophy is great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it can't get any fresher than that. It's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
Well, start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Case Quattro Winery, featuring over 20 flavors of wine, from dry red, dry white, and fruit for your sampling pleasure. Case Quattro Winery offers entertainment, parties, and private events. Now serving a full menu with a little something for everyone, including appetizers, salads, dinners, pizza, and desserts. Case Quattro has some of the best live entertainment in the area, with comedy and karaoke nights and live bands. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for all of our upcoming events. And if you mention the code OUTA, that's OUTTA, you get 15% off of your order. Located on Main Street in Peckville, Pennsylvania, call 570-382-3855 for more information. And we thank Case Quattro Winery for their support.
All right, let's get to the actual race now, because this is where Wallace really goes off the rails.
Really
in my article at Kennedy's and King, I wrote something like, "I never thought I would see the day when a supposed reputable journalist would try and use Seymour Hersh and Judith Exner."
Judith Exner. That's
and look, if you David Copperfield could not revive the bloody corpses of Seymour Hersh and Judy Exner. All right, but this is what he tries to do.
Yeah.
He tries to paint he tries to paint Nixon as his choir boy, okay, going through the election, and somehow Kennedy and his father, etc., okay, as people who actually stole the election. And he relies on Seymour Hersh and Judy Exner. In the article, as you will see, Judy Exner told, and I have to be careful here, I think it's 4 different stories, if you count them all, okay?
Yeah,
There are 4
unbelievable.
different stories about this issue, all right? Her original story, which you're supposed to go by if you're a practicing journalist, okay,
Sure.
is that she had nothing to do with anything going on between Kennedy and Chicago. She knew nothing about these plots to kill Castro, etc.
Right.
I'm not gonna write a book. I just want to stay out of all this crazy stuff. This was at a press conference in San Diego, reported by the New York Times.
Right.
Somehow, some way, Chris Wallace and his research team missed that New York Times article by John Crutzen. All right, because she did write a book, all right, shortly after that, called My Story. All right. And I've talked about this book and how there's unbelievable stuff in this book. Like
Yeah.
somehow Kennedy stopped everything and wanted to have a threesome between. This is at the LA convention. With everybody walking up and down and walking into his office, etc. Hey, all right. All right. So then her story changed again. All right. Her story now said that she was an unconscious intermediary between Kennedy and Giancana. Okay. This this came out of the blue. All right. In 1988, in an article she co-wrote supposedly for People magazine with, if you can believe it, Kitty Kelly. All right. All right. Except it turned out Kitty Kelly didn't write the story. All right. I researched this. It was
Right.
written by the editors of Time Life. But you know why? Because they had invested so much money. They had paid both of them $50,000. Back in
Right.
1988, that would be about $100,000 today. So they had $200,000 stuck in this story. And Exeter didn't want to work with Kelly. So they couldn't let it just go by their boards. And so they made up this story in which Judy Exner now was the messenger service between the White House and the mob. Okay. And what was the purpose? It was to steal elections and messages about the assassination of Castro. All
Castro,
right.
yeah.
Now remember,
Started under
1975,
Eisenhower.
1975. Okay. I know nothing about any of this. I don't want
Yeah,
to
it's
get
true.
involved. Okay, here we go. Okay,
Yeah.
for $50,000, she goes ahead and returns back to the subject, and now it's a new and revised edition. Okay, all right. Now, for Seymour Hersh, she changed the story again. Oh wait, hold, I missed one. Vanity Fair in '97. See, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah,
with
it's hard
all
to
these-
keep up with all the lies. Sure.
In
She couldn't even
1997,
do it. She couldn't even do it.
in 1997, she said Kennedy had impregnated her.
Yeah.
Okay.
After saying,
All right. Now, what makes that so bizarre is if you look back in her book, she
Yeah.
said, she screamed, I am not pregnant. I don't have to have an abortion. Okay. And now she reverses that and says it was JFK. All right.
unbelievable.
Okay. So
Unbelievable.
then it changes again. All right. with Hersh. Okay. And now she says this was something she was consciously doing. And she knew that there was $250,000 in this satchel that Kennedy had sent to Chicago. Okay. And she was meeting Sam Giancana at a train at a train station. Now listen. The idea that somehow Kennedy would have to give Giancana money when his father was worth $300 million. Okay. That is utterly
Ridiculous.
crazy in and of itself. All
Right.
right. Okay. But the fact that Giancana himself would meet Exner in public,
When
okay,
he's under surveillance 24/7.
at a train station.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just utterly preposterous. But Hersh knew he had a problem here because he got through Gus Russo a, a guy named Martin Underwood who said that somehow he witnessed this meeting between Exner and Giancana at the train station. All right. And he put this in his book.
Yeah.
You know, this is the same guy who wrote about the Marilyn Monroe Trust that also blew up in his
Well,
face.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Now this one is going to blow up in his face. And Peter Jennings actually reported this on TV. But there's a funny thing. Jennings said Underwood would not appear on television, but he didn't reveal why. Because when he was sworn under oath by the review board
Right.
in 1997, he denied the whole thing,
Yeah.
that he never did any such thing. Okay. So, in other words, Wallace avoids all of this. But finally, here's the clincher. In Hirsch's book, he says Bobby Kennedy tapped Exner on the shoulder at the White House and said, I hope you're comfortable carrying these messages back and forth to Chicago. We don't want you to do it if you're uncomfortable with it. So
But
she assured him that
she said she never met Bobby Kennedy before that.
well, okay, that's what I'm going to say.
Yeah. Okay.
Hirsch never bothered to look at a 1992 interview, which, by the way, is on YouTube, that Exner did with Larry King. And in that interview, he asked her, have you ever met Bobby Kennedy? She goes, no. I mean, he might have been at a rally in Los Angeles or something, but no. Okay. So see, these guys are so desperate to throw this manure up against the wall that they never cross-check. They never go back, okay, and trace, these inconsistencies, these paradoxes. And in the case of Judy Exner, I just call them flat out lies. Okay.
Yeah. Which one you believe?
Okay. And so this is what Wallace leaves out of his book. And I think the only way to explain this is that he's so agenda driven as to what he wants to do that it doesn't matter to him, the journalistic ethics that he's broken, one of which is, you don't leave out the problems with your witness. Okay.
Yeah.
In this case, both Seymour Hersh and Judy Exner. And let me finish this off with this. Here's the bottom line. Dan Fleming wrote a good book about the West Virginia primary. I think it's called West Virginia 1960 campaign or something like that. But just Google his name and you'll be able to find the book. There were 3 investigations of West Virginia. 3. Okay. Barry Goldwater, the local attorney general, and the FBI. None of them ever found any of this stuff, okay, that Judy Exner and Seymour Hersh are talking about. Now, here's the clincher. Barry Goldwater hired retired FBI agents. Okay, you think these guys like Kennedy? Okay.
No.
And they couldn't find anything. All right. And then Dan Fleming did like a year-long investigation, driving around the state, interviewing people. He couldn't find anything either. All right. Okay. Now, let's go to Chicago. Buddy Remmer was a guy in charge of the Get Giancana squad.
Right.
Okay. In Chicago.
Sure.
He wrote a book, Man Against the Mob.
Right.
Okay. He detailed the total surveillance. And when I say total surveillance, I mean
they followed him everywhere. Everywhere.
Okay.
In the
All right.
bathroom, they were following him.
Well, wait a minute. It's even better than that. When Giancana would get up from a restaurant and go to the urinal, Buddy Remmer would take the urinal right next to him. Okay. All right. So they had, and it wasn't just him, it was electronic surveillance at
Sure,
every meeting place
sure,
that Giancana held. Now, he went through the tapes. There was nothing in there about the Joe Kennedy or Judy Exner or any of that
sure.
stuff in any of those tapes. So how could this be true? You know, all right. Now, secondly, John Binder, a professor at the University of Chicago, I think he's retired now.
Right.
He did a statistical evaluation, okay, of those so-called mob-controlled wards in Chicago. All right. He came to the conclusion that not only was there no boost given to Kennedy, there was actually a falling off of the turnout in a couple of the wards.
That the mob controlled.
Right. So how can this be true? Okay. And the answer is it's not.
It's
And
not.
in fact, most people believe that this whole West Virginia myth
Made up by
began
Nixon.
with Nixon,
Yeah.
okay, when he began losing his mojo in
Mhm.
October of 1960. And,
Sure.
and and he planted his story in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch,
Right.
okay, all right, to somehow insinuate that Kennedy had used skullduggery in in West Virginia. Okay, because as I've proven, one last thing. Raymond Chafin.
Yeah.
Wallace uses Chafin, but
Unbelievable.
he uses him through uh, this writer Lawrence Sleemer. He doesn't refer to his book, which
Right.
I read, Just Good Politics, and he somehow says that Kennedy was illicitly running money to Chafin to win the election. This is what happened. Chafin was a very powerful Union leader in the western part of West Virginia who supported Humphrey.
Right.
Kennedy asked to meet with him. He said, "What's Humphrey offering you?" He tells him what he's offering him. "I'll give you that and more. Okay. And if I'm elected, I'll call you up to the White House and we'll work on this together." He takes him at his word and he switches allegiance.
Yeah.
He gets in contact with the Kennedy representatives on the ground and they ask him, "How much do you need?" Okay. And he says 35.
He got
Okay.
35,000.
So he meant 100.
3,500.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then a week before the election, the Kennedy plane flies in with Chafin waiting for it at the airport, and they bring in this trunk. Okay. And Chafin opens a trunk, and it's $35,000. Okay. All right. And he goes, "Holy Christ." And so he spent the next 2 days driving around the state, going to the other wards, dropping off this money.
Right.
Okay. But here's the clincher. Once Kennedy was elected,
He called him in.
he kept his promise.
Yeah.
Okay. He flew him up to the White House. All right. And I think it was Dave Powers or something was escorting him into the Oval Office. And Powers says something like, "Yeah, you have 15 minutes." And Kennedy says, "No, Dave, this man has as much time as he wants." Okay. And he closes the book by saying, "John Kennedy did more for West Virginia than any other president before or after." Okay. That's the story that Wallace leaves out.
Leaves it out.
Okay. Okay. And that's the kind of book that this is.
And Jim, you mentioned John Binder there. I don't know. Did you watch I think it's on Paramount Plus, but it's called Mafia Spies documentary. Did you see this?
I didn't see that. I heard it was pretty bad.
It's awful. Don't waste your time. It's terrible. But they have John Binder on there actually, but they never ask him the question about the 1960 election.
They avoided that election.
Really avoided it, but it's really bad. I mean, there's so much speculation. Of course, they use a lot of the stuff that came from Judy Exner and the garbage and stuff. It's terrible. Okay, so what do you think the motivation for Wallace besides? Do you think it's just to pump Nixon up, or do you think it was really more to just knock down Kennedy, or do you think
I
he
think I
wanted
think I think
to-
it was a knockdown Kennedy. That's what I think it was. And but at the end of the book, he's so stupid. He actually says, "I was reminded of this by the insurrection." Okay.
Yeah,
Somehow the 1960 election is like Trump calling 8,000 people, to Washington, and they go ahead and walk down and invade the Capitol, and they destroy property, and 8 or 9 people ended up dying. 145 policemen ended up getting injured.
but he doesn't mention the 2000 election, right?
Right. And that's what's so weird about this. That's what's so bizarre. So
That's
somehow,
good.
somehow at the end of the book, Wallace says that he recalled the 60 election while watching the insurrection. Well, first of all, the kid was 13 years old
Yeah.
during the 1960s. He didn't cover that one. Okay. All
Uh,
right. So what he does is he tries to relate one with the other, saying that Nixon accepted the loss, whereas Trump didn't. Well, that's not really true
right.
because there were inquiries into some valid discrepancies.
Sure.
Okay. And the problem that Nixon had is that in Illinois, for example, they would expose him stealing votes in the southern part of the state
Right.
if it
Sure.
turned out that somebody like Daley had stolen votes in the northern part of the state.
Sure.
Okay. And so that's one of the reasons he didn't go along with it. But for him to ignore the Bush versus Gore 2000 election
Yeah.
and say that this is more like that is just preposterous. Okay. In that one, you actually had the Roger Stone fake riot in
Yeah.
Miami-Dade County, okay,
Right.
which interrupted the vote counting, which very likely would have put Gore over the top. Okay. And then you had Scalia and the Supreme Court sanctifying this. Okay. That somehow that wasn't close to I would say it's very close to the insurrection, except
Sure.
that one worked in
Yeah.
2000. It worked. Okay. So, this is how bad Wallace's book really is.
And doesn't Wallace also try to say that the Teamsters were supporting Kennedy? Doesn't he say that in the book?
Something, I think you might be right about that, which I
Which
don't
is
recall
ridiculous
the
for Jimmy
exact
Hoffa.
detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The idea that Hoffa was going to support after he'd been called into the Senate by Bobby Kennedy, after Bobby Kennedy had gotten rid of Dave Beck, that somehow the Teamsters were going. Look, Jimmy Hoffa and Nixon were buddies. Okay, that's why
Sure.
Nixon ended up pardoning Hoffa later on.
Sure.
All right, that's the real association that Wallace doesn't want to talk about. Okay. So that's how bad this book really is.
And the other thing, Jim, when we talked about the Castro assassination plots, I mean, it's proven with the CIA's own Inspector General report that the Kennedys didn't know about those plots, right? And then
On
when they
pages,
found out about them,
on pages 132 and 133, and anybody can look this up. It's online. In the declassified Inspector General report by the CIA, it specifically says that there was no presidential approval for any of these plots extending back from Eisenhower through Kennedy through Johnson. And
right?
and it explains right then and there that when Bobby Kennedy found out about them
He was ripping.
through the illegal wiretap that Mayhew did for Giancana in
Right.
Las Vegas, all
McGuire
right,
system.
he called them in and they lied to him. Okay, they said that they had been discontinued. And when in fact, right in their report, it says, but they were not, because William Harvey was working with Johnny Rosselli,
Sure.
at this time. Okay. So no, there was never anything. I mean, look, the idea that somehow Exner would be sending messages, okay, to Giancana about these. Wouldn't Giancana say,
Already
Judy,
working with them.
Judy, I'm already working with the CIA So tell Jack that he doesn't need to tell me this stuff.
Unbelievable. It's
See,
unbelievable.
this is how silly this stuff is, you know? Okay. But this is the kind of stuff that sells books. You know,
Sure.
and since Wallace is a big time reporter, he gets these appearances, okay, on these stupid big time shows that never ask him the right questions.
Right. Well, I know, Jim, thanks for coming on here, short notice and everything, and we didn't bother you during the NFL Sunday football this time. We got you during the week, but we're going to try to get this out for this Friday because it's important to get ahead of this. But is there anything you want to say? Because I know you got another interview coming up with somebody.
Yeah.
So do you want to anything you want to say to wrap it up, or anything you left out that you want to
See,
talk about?
this is, as I've tried to say many, many times, there's a conscious effort by the MSM, okay, to belittle Kennedy and enlarge his enemies. And in my opinion, this goes back to two things. Number one, the MSM completely missed the boat on the John F. Kennedy assassination, and they've never been able to admit that they did that.
No.
And secondly, they never connected the assassination of John F. Kennedy with the escalation of the Vietnam War. And they never wanted to connect it.
No.
Okay. But
No.
this is a fact. 3 months after the 26 volumes of testimony and evidence were introduced into the record in November of 1964, Lyndon Johnson sent the first combat troops to Vietnam. And nobody in the MSM ever noticed that connection, which is really kind of amazing once you think about it.
Absolutely. Incredible. Well, all right, Jim, thanks a lot. We appreciate this, and we'll put a link up to your Kennedys and King article because it's fantastic. And thanks for taking the time and setting the record straight again.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Have a great
Bye-bye.
night. All right. Bye-bye.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.